Well, hello everyone. This is Rick Arlo, and I'm excited to be presenting with the ClinDoc World Conference this year. And I'm going to be providing an overview of a problem that many sponsors and CROs have really become familiar with in terms of site regulatory, in terms of ongoing issues around site audit readiness, PI oversight, and also complete site regulatory files or binders. It's been something that with a lot of very detailed and manual work to make sure that everything is perfect, that the site has everything that they need, and also the back and forth with the site to make sure that it's being done. It's always been a challenge to ensure that this work is happening correctly and consistently, and you have visibility into that work that's happening. And especially now with the nature of monitoring visits really changing, more remote, less on-site, more risk-based and targeted visits, monitors, CRAs may be missing this work as their visits where they traditionally did this work may be happening in a very different setting today. And so the original presentation here was titled something around TMF issues, and are those really coming from this ISF or the site file? And so we're still going to hit on these core concepts, particularly at the end of the session here. And we really changed some of the focus based on really what we thought would be of most interest for the group here today. So I'm really excited for this opportunity and for this session. And let's jump in. So first thing I wanted to do, everyone has a different path into clinical research. And I wanted to tell you a bit of my story. And so it's, in most people, an interesting path, not necessarily what you thought you wanted to do, when you grew up. And so for me, it was the same way. I was in a medical scientist training program, getting both an MD and a PhD to do clinical research. And in that work, I really saw that the regulatory burden was something holding my research site back from really being able to grow, to advance, to achieve the things that we wanted to. A massive burden that we had to face, and it was consistently filled with challenges and issues. And so really seeing that pain, both at the organization for individual studies and for the individuals, right, that were really carrying that work and carrying that burden here on themselves, really prompted me into action and really ended up building the first site e-regulatory software for my team specifically. And really what we noticed and what we'll be talking about a lot here today was that, initially just going paperless and helping to digitize this work, right? A vast majority of these sites today are managing these physical paper documents, I thought would really be able to solve the problem. And what we realized was that didn't necessarily lead to site audit readiness, which is really the most important thing, right? And so I ended up leaving my research to be able to help empower, sites and sponsors and CROs in this challenge. And so what might be, interesting here, right, coming from my standpoint, why leave this route and journey? Just really, what I saw, and I believe what the market is seeing here today, is that this site regulatory work is really critical. It's critical for the sponsors. It's critical for the sponsors in how they manage their studies, right? We've all known that quality is a leading driver for how sponsors choose to monitor their studies, whether in-house or with their CROs, in the selection of the CROs they use. But the site regulatory work, right, without this, can't really use the data in this clinical trial. It's incredibly important, right? Over 90% have said that this has a significant influence on their choice of how they actually manage their studies. And so let's explore this here, right? What are we talking about when we think about site regulatory and what goes into this, and really paint a picture for what this looks like here, right? So the site regulatory is a real pain for sponsors and CROs. First and foremost, right, you're relying on the site, right? It's the site's regulatory file that they need to own, and the site's responsible, right, for what you're accountable for. And there's really a lot of highly detail-oriented work to ensure this level of audit readiness. And many times CRAs don't have the time to be able to do this correctly. A majority of sites, maybe 80 to 90% today, right, are on paper. Physical binders is how they're storing this information. So historically, so the sponsor CROs ship this information to the site in a physical binder, then sending lots of emails or file sharing each new document, each new packet to each new site. A lot of that duplicate work from group to group. And needing to stitch together the story across the paper, the shared drives, the other places where this may live. And ultimately needing to go to the site, right? See how they're managing this. And it's, a bit of a surprise when you get there in terms of, has it been touched? Has everything been updated? Is it here? There may be turnover at the site. They don't maybe even know themselves, right? And many times today in the current environment, this is replaced with FaceTime. There's an additional burden to scan and lots of questions, right, that go into this process. And so, with that being said, let's look at, in a poll here, really the problems that have been coming from site regulatory, right? Again, that audit readiness, PI oversight, complete site regulatory files. Really everyone in this individual poll has said that, they no one has said that they're actually, fully on top of this and have a great understanding of how this is working today, right? So there's a lot of issues going into this work to ensure that that PI oversight and audit readiness and completeness is there, and there's a lot of a lack of understanding of if everything is fully being done today, right? So really some big challenges, both to do the work as well as to even understand what the current state is. And so now let's look at the actual process itself, right? This is probably something that is very familiar to many individuals here that have done this work. And so why are these issues so widespread? Well, let's look at all of that manual work that needs to happen, that very detail-oriented work to make sure that that site regulatory file is complete, that there's audit readiness, that there's PI oversight, right? And ultimately to make sure that everything is there in that site regulatory file in a way that can be found, ideally following your way, right? So it can be easier for your team to find everything that they need to. And so first and foremost, the biggest thing to realize is that all of this work obviously is dependent on the site, right? It's about their regulatory requirements, their staff, their site, their labs that they're using, whether those are central or local, whether those are different types of equipment that need to be managed. It's about the amendments and also the approvals for things like subject documents and other aspects that they need to have, ads and other things, right, at their organization, and the PI oversight around everything there. And so first and foremost, it's dependent on what's happening at the site, and each site may have slightly different requirements, maybe using different labs, different equipment, different staff members, obviously, right? Different SOPs for what they are managing. And also needing to ensure that the IRB correspondences that they're doing are all there and showing that level of audit readiness and oversight. And so the CRA is in this position to need to track this, right? In a majority of cases today, that's, being done very well, right, is in a massive Excel sheet, maybe a whole different sheet for every individual site with lots of tabs to track these different aspects. What's missing, what's expired, is the document there, has it been updated, is there a newer version, right? Do they have the right information in this massive Excel sheet and list? And extensive amount of this coordination, communication, the monitor letters, the emails, the queries, the follow-ups, are we making sure the site's getting this work done? And then ultimately ensuring that you can ensure that complete audit ready file, that you can collect the key information, right, in the right format, that's only the complete document since the last time that you've been there. And the key part, if you step back from this, right, is if any of this information is missed, then you really don't know. How would you have any way of knowing if one of these key cells or Excel sheets here were lost, or with turnover with a CRA, that all of that had been done? The only way of really knowing is jumping back into the work and redoing that, right? And re-going through all of those individual steps and doing that additional manual duplicate work again. And there's still opportunities to miss the needle in the haystack that an auditor, that an inspector could find. And so as we'll see, next, right, with so much of this very detailed manual work, the current state environment with traditional visits really being disrupted has led many to question, is this work even happening today? And so again, in the similar poll, again, not a single individual polled really felt like this work is actually consistently happening today. And so again, with real-time data analysis and risk-based monitoring, where again, monitors are focused on the specific sites and areas they need to focus on with limited on-site visits today or none. Again, is this work actually even happening, right? Again, 90% of the sponsors out there said it was critical for site regulatory to be done correctly in terms of their study management and how they select their CROs and teams to do this work. But again, not a single individual here is actually feeling like it's consistently happening, right? And so with so much of this manual and detailed work and so many cases where there's concern, is it even happening today, right? How do you actually ensure site audit readiness? And so there's a key discovery that I want to be able to share from some of the, now over 7-8 years of time that I've spent in this area. And it's really that, simply shoving documents into somewhere new, into some new tool for doing so, whether it's a tool that's highly familiar and something that sites or others may be used to move folders around the way they want, or whether it's something highly advanced to have all the best document, features around it, isn't actually going to solve for this level of site audit readiness. The real root of this problem, right, as we look at it with so much manual and detailed work back and forth with the site, the only way to ensure site audit readiness is a digital solution for site regulatory, right? The real workflows and the process around what needs to be there and how it needs to be done to track the actual regulatory requirements at that site, right? Not just the massive list of documents and keeping that separately in somebody's head and somebody's Excel sheet, but really having a solution that understands what those requirements are and the workflow to ensure that everything is done along that process, right? And so the document and signature tools can provide remote access, which is definitely a part of the problem here, but ultimately still rely on that CRA's experience and their very tight schedule to make sure that they can do everything, identify what needs to be done, communicate with the site, and also make sure that they're able to complete everything that they need to. And I know this may seem like a new concept. It may not necessarily be for everyone, right? But with this new mindset now, framing around why this is a regulatory workflow problem compared to a document problem, let's take that new concept and really now redefine, right, and reframe what the problem is here, what the opportunity is in more detail, and then really just provide a brief overview of what a solution here could be to this really persistent, problem, right, that is facing us here today. And so, again, let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into this, what's causing this site regulatory chaos with this new reframing of the problem here, right? And again, with so much of this manual and detailed work, that back and forth that needs to happen with the site, what we've seen is even the most detailed, table of contents, Excel sheet, training, and SOPs, still relies on these staff members, right? And it still requires a level of additional interpretation for when the actual new amendment or signature or document is needed, right? And this high level of detail orientation that can often get lost, right? Between the CRA and the site, between turnover on either side. Does this site need the document? What's required for PI oversight? Is it complete? Where does it need to go? And so again, even with the best staff, this leads to inevitable error. And they still might not even get the time, right, with the site to even do all the work that needs to happen. And if it's hard for then your staff, your CRAs, CTAs to be doing this work, it's even harder for the site to be able to follow up and complete every detail. And they're frustrated with very unclear expectations and potentially arbitrary preferences provided by individual CRAs, right? And so again, there's this, now we can look at this problem again, not just one of, remote access or physical documents or of managing the sea of documents, but really looking at the problem here as the fact that it relies here on the individuals, and because of the level of detailed work, there's still things that can get lost, right? And so what's the real opportunity here if we look and reframe that as well, right? So the real opportunity is, well, I think first to step back, we understand that the attention to detail and the best practices that CRAs, that sites are bringing, right, are a critical part of their skill set, is an insurance for how this work is getting done today, right? But as we mentioned, even with the best staff, the most detailed SOPs and trainings, there's inevitable issues, which is what the data is showing today. And more importantly, these individuals can be doing so much more with their time, right? The CRAs can be seeing more sites, focusing on more of the actual data-related issues that they're running into. And the sites can be focused on seeing more patients, right? So by simply defining one single way for how your organization as a sponsor, as a CRO, manages this, right? The site regulatory and enforces this, right? Without the burden of all of the additional Excel and training and expectations here, being able to enforce that in a site regulatory focused solution, we can get that real-time insight into site audit readiness. And it's not just dependent on the staff interpretation, the ability to actually get to this work. It's not just about the documents, right? But it's really about that actual level of compliance, right? And with all of those new staff members and amendments, new subject materials, new labs, new equipment, new SOPs at the site, all of those things, right? Or is everything here that needs to be, has the PI shown the right oversight? And then set the clear expectations and much higher effective levels of communication with everybody involved. And so let's step back and really look at the real cost here of what this impact could look like. And so today, about 20–25% of the CRA's time is spent on site regulatory. Again, if they're actually getting to the work here today. And as we mentioned, some amount of that today is around the documents, the shipping, the scanning, the emailing, the sharing of those. But more importantly, the majority of this time is actually about the tracking of the work. Is it complete? Is it in the right format? The coordination back and forth. So is there an opportunity to greatly reduce that time to enable them to be able to get to more sites, do more work, do this at lower cost with a much higher level of quality? And further, with this work not getting done here on time or waiting right until the very end of the study to actually comprehensively review everything from a site regulatory standpoint, does that create delays to site closeout, to database lock, to your final submissions, and also lead to significant unanticipated change orders and costs, right? Whether those are for corrective and preventative actions or third-party auditors to help fix those issues, and ultimately audit and inspection findings, both at the site and sponsor and CRO level, for not ensuring that this work is happening consistently throughout the study, right? And so let's step back here. What's next? What are the two different routes really for solutions and next steps? And so, one route here, as we talked about really and showed that picture here at the very beginning and painted that picture with burden of this work and going to the site and the fact that a lot of this is paper and email and scanning today. There's tools, really document tools around digitizing this existing process, continuing to put that burden on the CRAs and the sites to track every detail, to make sure it's there, and relying on that staff skill and interpretation. And the other route here is being able to actually solve this bigger underlying problem by having a digital solution for site regulatory to define the processes and workflows and ensure consistency, not tracking the documents, but tracking the requirements and if those are done, right? And so really as a quick overview here with Complion, we really are in that second category. We believe that just digitizing those bad processes creates bad digital processes, right? And our focus is really being able to approach these site regulatory inefficiencies with the solutions that actually technology can uniquely deliver. And so really, you know, site regulatory is our entire focus. And we know that these unique challenges, and we're not here to digitize them, but to be able to solve them with purpose-built workflows. And that's really all we do. As I mentioned, the first purpose-built software of its kind in this category, now over 10,000 of these fully electronic regulatory binders here on the system that these sites are using as their actual, you know, auditable record here. And all of that clear focus, right, has led to a massive degree of scale, but also a strong drive to really innovate, just in the documents in this process, but into this site regulatory study management. And so just to leave you with some concepts here, because I know this might be a newer concept for what this world looks like, right? But with this degree of focus and taking that route to really have the solution around site regulatory itself, right? What does that look like? And as I mentioned, you know, let's kind of run through a couple of the key capabilities. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get into all the details, but would love to be able to spend some time with you afterwards if there's interest to really understand your challenges and really show you what the solution might look like in more detail. And so, you know, the first thing, as we mentioned, is you've got to be able to define in your way, right? The rules for actually what are required. And I know some groups have done this in extensive depth with really predefined Excel sheets, taking that here to the next level, and believing in the power that information here can provide, having that defined, right, where if you can build that into a system that understands as much about the document as you do, to be able to help do that work for you. And so what does that look like once you've defined that way, the rules for what's required? Then instead of needing to track all this stuff in somebody's head or in a big Excel sheet, can we track the key study and site requirements in a purpose-built system that isn't focused on each individual document and relying on that individual CRA or site staff member to know, right, what needs to happen, but to track that key information, using that information to identify the clear expectations for what's actually needed and needs to happen with purpose-built workflows to ensure that happens correctly and shows the highest level of PI oversight. Ultimately, by doing this, you can get a real clear insight at the end of the day into what's new, what's complete, the documents that you need as well that will ultimately go into the TMF here at the end of the day. And by providing this overview, right, now the sites themselves can get additional value because it's not just, you know, the same burdensome work that they've always done, but just digitally, but actually providing a value point to the sites and something that's more simple and intuitive for them instead of having to learn how to speak this massive document language and workflow of how things need to be documented. They're more focused on what the new amendments, requirements, labs, and credentials are they need to manage at that level. And it ultimately enabling that level of site adoption. And coming back here, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation here, around these TMF issues that are consistently happening and challenges around the completeness and timeliness here, especially. Many of these are actually coming from these issues that aren't being spotted here at this site level. And so being able to utilize, right, a solution that can be that site source of the truth and drive completeness, and actually ensure, right, that the site is audit ready first. Leverage that, right, to really simplify the eTMF process, right? The classification and the quality checks and controls that need to happen. Changing the total timeliness from not just when documents are uploaded to the TMF to when they're complete, but when they're actually even completed here at the site level. And really improving the quality here as these documents are born electronic here to begin with, and completeness by really plugging into that actual source of the truth and ensuring that you get everything that you need. And so, as I mentioned here today, really the goal of the conversation was to look at this persistent and nagging problem around site regulatory, right? The findings around audit readiness, PI oversight of these site regulatory files being incomplete, understanding what may be a real cause here under the scenes causing that real issue, and what some potential solutions could be. Obviously, we don't have a ton of time here to go through everything, so we'd love to be able to take your questions, and also, if there's interest, be able to connect with you here afterwards. So thank you for your time. As I mentioned, really excited to have this opportunity to connect with everyone here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.